My name is Katie Ruth. I am the executive director here at Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light. This is our Religion and Environment series, which we started in the fall of last year. I can hardly believe we are already in 2024, but here we are, all gathered together. So far in this series, we spent some time talking about the Christian tradition broadly, and then we did a deep dive into the Jewish tradition along with the Islamic tradition. And so maybe some of you have joined us for some of those previous conversations. Today, I'm very excited and delighted to welcome both Helga Stokes and Christine Muller to talk to us a little bit about the Baha'i faith and how that connects to the environment. So thank you all for being here. I will tell you a little bit more about Pennsylvania Interfaith Power and Light if you are new a little later in our program today. But for now, I'm actually going to get us right started and introduce our first speaker for today and tell you a little bit about her. So first up today, we have Helga Stokes. Helga Stokes has a professional background in education. She worked at middle school, high school, and university levels, and brings an interest in innovative approaches to education, including environmental education. She is a mother of 3 and a grandmother of 5, and she enjoys gardening. With the help of her son, she has set up a small backyard garden, planting mostly edibles and incorporating permaculture principles. She is currently learning about connections between growing food and the impact on our health. Helga came to know about the Baha'i faith in the early 70s while she was still in high school and quickly became a member of the Baha'i community. Helga grew up in southern Germany, and so life and work, including her husband's work, has taken the family to several countries of the global south. They mostly lived in rural areas where she saw agricultural practices, including subsistence farming, close up. So without further ado, I want to welcome and thank Helga for being here with us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for inviting us. Let me get started by sharing the screen and going into the presentation. Good. I hope everybody can see things okay. And what I wanted to focus on is the perspective from the Baha'i faith that we are all connected, and then share a few insights from the Baha'i sacred texts that refer to the care of our planet. Just briefly, background, since it's a relatively new faith and you might not be that familiar with it. The origin is in the mid-19th century in Iran. The prophet founder is known as Baha'u'llah, which translates to the glory of God. And the core tenets are the oneness of God, the unity of religion, and the unity of humanity. It is a global community, and you see to the right a few snapshots from different gatherings. Going into the environment, it says that it is so important that faith communities get engaged in the healing of our planet, and also in very practical ways. As it says here, we should live with our spirit in heaven and with our feet on earth. So we cannot segregate the human heart from the environment outside us and say that once one of these is reformed, everything will be improved. Man is organic with the world. His inner life molds the environment and is itself also deeply affected by it. Moving on to the vision of nature, it is seen as the embodiment of God's name. Its manifestations are diversified by varying causes, and in its diversity, there are signs for man of discernment. Nature is God's will and is its expression in and through the contingent world. Now, unity in diversity is visible everywhere. Everything is connected: soil, water, plants, animals, every created thing in the whole universe is but a door leading to his knowledge. And we are asked to reflect upon the inner realities of the universe, the secret wisdoms involved, the enigmas, the interrelationships, the rules that govern all. Now, this then includes and brings us to the care of our planet. As we learn more about these relationships, we might undergo a paradigm shift in our thinking from survival of the fittest to recognizing collaboration. As we know, there are symbiotic relationships between all things. And as it states here, we're one to observe with an eye that discovers the realities of all things. It would become clear that the greatest relationship that binds the world of being together lies in the range of creative things themselves, and that cooperation, mutual aid, and reciprocity are essential characteristics. We practice some of this in the way we plant, for example, companion planting. Some flowers put nutrition back or some plants into the soil. Others benefit from the same. So the balance of species and the collaboration amongst them always is something to consider. Now, there are many facets to the care of our planet. It begins with the soil, the thing which is the source of his, in this case, humans' prosperity, his wealth, his might, his exaltation, his advancement and power, as ordained by God, the very earth which is trodden beneath the feet of all men. So this gives one really a sense of humility, how we are all dependent on healthy soils to give us healthy plants, healthy animals, and also then healthy nutrition. Then next, Baha'u'llah and his son Abdul Baha go on to talk about kindness to plants and animals, including through the education of children. We should focus on it. It says, rather must they show forth the utmost loving kindness to every living creature. Train your children from the earliest days to be infinitely tender and loving to animals. And we know if we have children and animals that that is wonderful, uplifting activity to do. Last but not least, Baha'u'llah actually talks about the role of the farmer. As it says here, the farmer must be accorded his or her rightful place in the process of development and civilization building. As the villages are reconstructed, the cities will follow. And this is a very interesting point because when we hear about climate change and the causes and needs for remediation, we often hear renewable energy and technology, but in reality also industrial farming has a huge output of CO2. And there are ways we can turn this around through more regenerative farming practices and just listen and hear and work with the wisdom of farmers, especially traditional farmers who know so much how to grow things in more healthy ways. Now, for all this to achieve the harmony of science and religion is so paramount, and I think this is a wonderful effort of interfaith power and light, that it brings the two together, the science and the religion, because religion and science are the two wings upon which man's intelligence can soar into the heights with which the human soul can progress. It is not possible to fly with one wing alone. We have observed throughout history that science by itself leads to materialism, and religion by itself can lead to superstition. Now, moving on, I just wanted to share a few examples of Baha'i environmental action. It begins back in history that Baha'u'llah and his family and some of his followers, they were actually exiled from the country of origin, from Iran, and ended up in the prison colony of what was then the Ottoman Empire in Akka, now the Bay of Akka and Haifa in Israel. Some of you might be familiar with the Baha'i World Center there. So when they were imprisoned in Accra, they little by little gained the confidence of the governor, and the governor asked Baha'u'llah what he can do for them. And Baha'u'llah says, restore the aqueduct for water supply to Accra. At that point, the city was pretty decrepit, and the people had no fresh water. So the governor did so, and we see here the aqueduct. Later, Baha'u'llah's son Abdul Baha guided farmers in the village of Adasir, which was then Palestine and today's Syria, in agricultural innovation and water conservation. And he actually organized storage and rationing of grain. And if you recall the historical circumstances around 1918, end of World War I, and then slowly the establishment of the country of Israel, there was a time of famine and crisis, and this kind of grain storage actually averted the famine in the region. Following that, Abdul Baha began to create gardens around the holy places in Akka and Haifa, and these also take environmental consideration into account. If you've seen photos, you see they're quite extensive, and the water conservation, like in those ponds and everything, it's all recirculated water. So it's all done with conservation and the ecology in mind. Pardon me. Now, keeping along the practical implementations, there are currently also various avenues for service to the earth, and there are efforts at global collaborative initiatives by the Baha'i community. Now, there are programs for capacity building, because all these efforts should be from the community, basically bottom up, grassroots. And these kind of capacity building initiatives, they look at reading our reality. What is our community? What does it need? How does it function? What's best for it? What's the ecology, and so on. Then planning and consultation with each other and carrying out actions based on spiritual values. So there are assorted tutorial programs. One is called the Ruhi Institute. They're tutorial study circles that go in many different themes, spiritual values, and hands-on practical things. It's basically for people 15 and older. Next, a junior youth spiritual empowerment program for approximately middle school age children that also is global, where the youth learn to read their own reality, contemplate their life's path, their goals, their values, and then design service projects that quite frequently have to do with environmental issues. I know when we had a junior youth program here in Pittsburgh, they did tree planting, some weed eradication, just pulling them out and so on. Children's classes, of course, is another aspect. Again, global. There are easy to follow programs for that and training available for those who wish to engage in it. And again, amongst many other themes, as it said earlier, train them into being kind to animals and to plants. So the environment is always one aspect of it. And devotional gatherings and meaningful conversations lay the spiritual foundation for our efforts. In conclusion, a couple of examples. They're just two of many. So there's the initiative to restore native forest in the Colombia, South America, in the Norte del Cauca region near Cali. And in this case, the objectives of the program is, once is restoration. They're close to 30 acres, which is not a huge plot, but it's more meant to be an example, a learning place. They're being restored with native flora species from the Norte del Cauca area. There's demonstration. You offer examples to farmers and students from the region, how their land can be restored and maintained. There's education, preserve traditional knowledge and raise awareness among young people and children from nearby communities about the importance of conserving the environment and being familiar with the species of the region. Then distribution, ensure that the area's inhabitants have access to diverse seeds and native species from a community nursery. And recreation, provide a space where visitors can reflect and deepen their appreciation for nature and the attributes of God that are present there. If you wish to read more, the website is listed down here. Along similar lines, a number of countries in Africa have done inroads into a collective action research in the realm of agriculture. So there's several Baha'i-inspired organizations on the continent, and they respond to the emerging capacity in the area of agriculture in a way that would be coherent with the process of community building and spiritual transformation already underway. Collective action research means that it's embedded in the community, that the people involved observe and then adjust their practices accordingly. So collaboration is always the basis of it all. With that, I'm coming actually to the end of the direct connection with nature, the practical aspects and inroads, and I'll hand it over to Christine Muller, who will then talk about the social and collaborative and also policy-making aspects of the engagement of the Baha'i community into the environmental issues we are facing. So thank you very much, and I'm gonna stop sharing here and pass it over to Christine.
Thank you. Thank you, Helga. I'll briefly introduce Christine as well. Christine joins us today with a long history of working in the environmental field. She is a graduate from the Music Academy in Basel, Switzerland, with degrees in both piano teaching and early childhood music education. Due to the urgency of the environmental crisis, she has spent most of her life studying and teaching environmental issues. She serves as faculty at the Wilmette Institute courses Climate Change and Sustainable Development. She is also a board member at Rhode Island Interfaith Power and Light, and I saw a couple folks in the chat saying that you were there, so welcome, friends. Thanks for joining us. And she is also the secretary of the Baha'i-inspired International Environmental Forum. So very glad to have Christine with us to share more about some of the practical ways that Baha'i faith is inspiring environmental action.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much, Katie, for the kind introduction and for inviting us. Can you hear me? Okay, right. So I will pick up where Helga left off, and want to point out that, as you are aware, the triple planetary crisis with climate change, the loss of biodiversity, and pollution is threatening our very existence. The science is very alarming, but we can find hope and guidance in our faith. Baha'u'llah wrote, each one of the ordinances we have revealed is a mighty stronghold for the preservation of the world of being. For me, these words provide much hope, and I'm happy to share with you a few Baha'i teachings today that Baha'is believe can preserve the world of being. At the heart of the Baha'i faith is the oneness of humankind, that all human beings are equal, that there is only one race, the human race, and that this is the age in which we must learn to live together like one global family. Baha'u'llah wrote, "Ye are all the leaves of one tree and the drops of one ocean. Be ye as the fingers of one hand, the members of one body." Acceptance of the oneness of humanity demands that prejudices must be totally eliminated. The Baha'i teachings say, recognition of this truth, the oneness of humankind, requires abandonment of prejudice of every kind, race, class, color, creed, nation, sex, degree of material civilization, everything which enables people to consider themselves superior to others. Racism plays a role at the beginning and at the end of the climate change problem. First, people of color are more likely to live in a polluted neighborhood. Then, of course, people of color are also more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, such as heat waves, storms, and rising food prices. And on top of all that, the voice of people, the voice of people of color is often not adequately represented in decision-making because of discriminatory practices. The equality of men and women is a new teaching in religious history, and it is significant regarding climate change in many ways. First, we need to consider that women are disproportionately more affected by the impacts of climate change. They generally have less access to resources such as land, credit, agricultural inputs, technology, and educational services that could help them cope with a changing climate. As caregivers, women's lives are also severely impacted by increasing water scarcity and diseases like malaria that are spreading to new areas because of climate change. The status of women also has a direct impact on population growth. Atmospheric greenhouse gas concentrations have only reached such dangerously high levels because of the large number of people living on our planet. Family size is generally smaller when women are empowered to plan their family in terms of birth timing and spacing, and when they have the freedom to participate fully and equally in society. The empowerment of women is not only a human rights issue, but also a key element to fight poverty and climate change. Experience has shown already that the participation of women in climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts is vital. Women have always been leaders in working for the health and well-being of their families and communities. Justice has a central place in the Baha'i teachings. It is the prerequisite for unity. Baha'u'llah said, "No light can compare with the light of justice. The establishment of order in the world and the tranquility of the nations depend upon it." There are many dimensions of climate justice. Here, I will only mention one of them. Baha'u'llah directly connects justice to moderation, which is especially important for efforts to mitigate climate change. He wrote, "Whoso cleaveth to justice can, under no circumstances, transgress the limits of moderation." The civilization, so often vaunted by the learned exponents of arts and sciences, will, if allowed to overleap the bounds of moderation, bring great evil upon men. If carried to excess, civilization will prove as prolific a source of evil as it had been of goodness when kept within the restraints of moderation. By the way, Baha'u'llah lived from 1817 to 1892. Baha'u'llah calls us to live a life of moderation and contentment. Take from this world only to the measure of your needs, and forego that which exceedeth them. Spirituality is the remedy for overcoming materialism and consumerism. And you all know how important this is for the environment. A spiritual outlook can help us shift the emphasis from consumption to well-being and a meaningful life. The Bahá'í writings say, man is in reality a spiritual being, and only when he lives in the spirit is he truly happy. So what does spirituality mean? Baha'u'llah wrote, O my servant, free thyself from the fetters of this world, and loose thy soul from the prison of self. So we need to free ourselves from the ego. The Baha'i teachings encourage spiritual practices such as prayer and meditation, but emphasize that service to the common good is key to spiritual development. It will help us to turn the focus from the me to the we. Baha'u'llah wrote, let your vision be world-embracing rather than confined to your own self. Focusing on the common good, on the well-being of everyone, is important for us as individuals to lead a meaningful life. And it is essential for humanity to address climate change and the other critical environmental and social problems of our time. Such a world-embracing view helps us as individuals to understand that my everyday actions affect my brothers and sisters all around the world. This attitude helps us make environmentally responsible choices. Moreover, on the societal level, it is the prerequisite for addressing nationalism and the foundation for a much-needed improved system of global governance, which is fundamentally important for effective climate action. As we can see from the outcome of a series of international climate conferences, our global human family is paralyzed by nationalistic and short-term economic self-interests. We need to make a transition from thinking in terms of nation states to world citizenship. Baha'u'llah said, the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens. The Universal House of Justice, the supreme institution of the Baha'i faith, wrote, the welfare of any segment of humanity is inextricably bound up with the welfare of the whole. Humanity's collective life suffers when any one group thinks of its own well-being in isolation from that of its neighbors, or pursues economic gain without regard for how the natural environment, which provides sustenance for all, is affected. The environmental crisis demands that all of humankind work together to implement solutions. The Baha'i international community wrote, the solution to climate change exceeds the capacities and resources of any one nation and requires the full cooperation of all nations, each according to their means. Baha'is envision a world order that is decentralized and empowers people at the grassroots. That is why we are learning to collaborate with others in local and social actions. At the same time, we are striving to infuse public discourse with spiritual principles and values and emphasize the need for good global governance. For example, Baha'is involved in such conversations have supported the strengthening of the United Nations Environment Programme to become an environmental agency that has binding authority, as well as the creation of an international environment court. I will close with the words of Baha'u'llah. Take pride not in love for yourselves, but in love for your fellow creatures. Glory not in love for your country, but in love for all mankind. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Christine. And thank you, Helga, for both of those presentations. I'm going to bring you two and me into a conversation now. So if you have questions for either of our presenters today, if you can go ahead and put your questions into the chat, we will collect those and include them in our discussion as we go. We already had one question come in the chat, which I'll get to in just a moment. But before I get there, Christine and Helga, I'm wondering if you could take a moment to maybe tell us a little more deeply, what inspired your personal story? What for you has created that connection at this nexus of Baha'i faith and environmentalism? You shared so many beautiful teachings that are part of the Baha'i tradition. And so wondering how that personally happened for you.
Christina, please.
Okay, let's start. Well, first, when I was young, I saw how the natural environment was diminished in the country of Switzerland during a huge building boom. And I saw many agricultural areas and forests, disappear. And that awakened my environmental interest. And I got really already at a young age quite disturbed, because I thought, if this happens to Switzerland now, if that continues, we can see it because it's a small country, but the Earth is also limited. And if we continue like that, this will reach the whole Earth and we will exceed planetary limits. And that's where we are actually today. And I was very concerned. And when I discovered the Baha'i faith, I was searching for answers. I thought, if the Baha'i faith is really guidance from God, we must have teachings that help us with the environmental crisis. And so I basically dedicated my life to bringing that together. And this has been a source of great hope for me, because I deal too much with the science and seeing all the, like the human progress. We have made a lot of progress. And there is a lot of great potential, because as Baha'is, we also see that human beings are created noble. We have great capacity, but seeing the actions taken so far, they are very slow compared to the crisis. And so my hope is in the Baha'i teachings and in the goodness of humanity.
Yeah, certainly that connection between the spirituality and the science obviously is the reason why folks like us exist. But I think it's so important to name how transformative it can be when we pair those two things together. Helga, what about for you?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Christine, I grew up in southern Germany, which has beautiful nature. Anybody who's ever seen pictures of Bavaria knows, and you have the Alps close by. Early on, it was talk about acid rain and deforestation as a result of it. There was a creek where as kids we used to swim that was so polluted that then we couldn't go into it anymore. And these were the early impressions. So as you mentioned, then I learned about the Baha'i faith in my high school days. So it was always with me, the environmental issues. And most recently, living here in Pittsburgh, also, I could see the difference, what it makes on, depending what your socioeconomic status is, what your race, your ethnic heritage is, how you live, with heat islands in neighborhoods that don't have trees much. So that was one aspect that got me involved here with some of the local initiatives, a little community garden in my neighborhood, and so on and so forth. There was one more thing I meant to say. Okay, escapes me now. Anyway.
Thank you. I think, yeah, the practice of getting to know one's place and how that connects us to the issues that we care about, it helps us to understand better our own selves and how we live in right relationship with a global family. That has also been my experience. It is by witnessing what is happening around me with the trees and the water and the things that are happening in my own neighborhood.
And also that's what I meant to say. Being of a certain age now, I see so many of my peers having chronic health issues. And the connection between soil health, plant health, animal health, and human health is just so it's well documented, but we don't know about it.
It's almost like we live in a connected ecosystem.
Yeah.
So Vince Riley asked in the chat, and I think this question I will give, and either of you can answer as you feel called, but he was wondering if Baha'i communities in Africa have been impacted by religious violence in several African countries today, including Sudan and Nigeria.
Well, I think that all people there are impacted, including the Baha'is. They cannot escape. And I don't know the details because I don't live there, but I'm aware that Baha'is have done from the beginning that there have been Baha'i communities there. They have always reached out to people from different tribes and bring people together. So that has always been like the focus of outreach, is bring people together. It's unity and diversity in action. So that has always been the path, and they are pursuing it today and everywhere in the world where there is conflict.
Yeah, and the classic the long-lasting example of persecution is unfortunately in the country of Iran, which continues to go on, and the Baha'is are just like any other minority or women are impacted by it. And then throughout history, off and on, in the communist countries, the Baha'i community had to basically disband. In Nazi Germany, the Baha'is couldn't function. So yeah, so they're affected by all of this, just like anybody else.
Yeah, I think it highlights what you were sharing earlier, Christine, of how we imagine living in right relationship together across all of these constructs that we've made, borders and traditions. Not to say that we have to eliminate those things. I think the unique articulations that we have are very important, but how to live at peace and with a sense of our collective oneness is so important. Marilyn Berberich was also, she has a different question, but maybe there's some overlap too. Was wondering if there are significant differences in embracing regenerative farming between a corporate farming model and a more like individualistic or family farming model. And wondering if the mindsets behind a corporate farming model and like the family farming model are very similar or different in terms of regenerative agriculture.
Now, this is not particularly, of course, there are Baha'is who practice regenerative farming. I've just been in a book study circle, and there were a number of Baha'is from, a lot of them from Canada actually, who practiced regenerative farming. Also the examples that were shown from various African countries and Latin America. So they're making inroads into more traditional practices, which are more aligned with what we commonly now refer to as regenerative farming. So it makes sense to do it in accordance with what the environment requires and just think of what each specific environment is. That's why the educational programs are also rooted in the community, and people learn to assess their own reality and do the agriculture accordingly.
Christine, I wonder if you have any thoughts to offer, having spent a lot of time in some of these international spaces where they talk about different models and the scale of those models for regenerative agriculture. I wonder if you have anything to offer here.
I'm not an agricultural expert, but I think it's always the motivation. It is wonderful when big businesses get into regenerative agriculture, and we need it. But probably right now it's the small farmers that are leading the way. But I think it's wonderful when it becomes more mainstream. When they can balance the science and ethical values and the laws of sustainability, and then also try to make a living in a fair way. Even for corporations, this needs to be limited. Profits need to be, it shouldn't be at the center, the profit making. Then I think it will succeed.
Thank you, Christine and Helga. I also want to uplift for folks who are maybe not following the conversation in the chat. A couple of folks were sharing about some Baha'i families that have become refugees, and even some who have resettled here in Pennsylvania. And then also the Baha'i community in the Democratic Republic of Congo actually was recently highlighted for a new house of worship. So you can check out that conversation that's happening in the comments as well, but some folks sharing some more insights into Vince's earlier question.
Yeah.
One thing that I think this conversation is raising for me is something that's highlighted in the One Planet, One Habitation resource that you both shared with me, and I had the pleasure of getting to read, and so we'll be sharing that out in the follow-up email, and perhaps Reinika will drop the link in the comments here too. But it's a whole comprehensive kind of perspective on how Baha'i faith is connected to and responding to the environmental crisis, and it was a wonderful read. And I'm still sitting with one of the kind of points that was made around justice being both a process and an outcome, and the language of holding those both perspectives together, that the way we do the work and the destination we are heading towards, both of those things matter. And so I've heard a lot of that highlighted in both of your presentations and in our conversation here. So wondering if either of you wants to talk a little bit more about how that specifically is, that perspective comes from a Baha'i perspective.
Yeah, it comes to my mind that Baha'u'llah said, the purpose of justice is the appearance of unity among men. And the oneness and unity of humankind is the goal, the ultimate goal of the Baha'i faith. And I would say of all faiths, when you read the Holy Scriptures, like the Golden Age, when we all live in peace. But the way to go there means that we have to live these principles already. small scale as well as, you know, in larger enterprises. So, for example, in one way, there is a special method of decision making in the Baha'i faith. It's called consultation. So when diverse people come together, and more diversity, all the better, because then you have more experiences and different points of view, and everyone shares their view very openly about any topic of discussion. But everyone would just offer their view as a gift to the community, and then detaches themselves from their personal view and looks at all the other views, and then the group, it can be an institution or a local community, they come together with a much better path of action, because they can have consensus about how to move forward, and everyone is going to support the decision. So unity is maintained, but there is also justice. Everyone is very much encouraged to participate in the process and to share their views.
That actually brings me to, there's in the chat, there's a question, any suggestions around priorities for the local level? And what you just described, this pathway of consultation, looking at your own reality, and keeping also science and religion and values-based decision-making together, that actually allows you then to work in your local level. It's so different from place to place. So we cannot set a priority from the outside. I think it has to become determined at the local level itself.
Christine, anything further to add to that, kind of how we build or what priorities we should keep at the local level?
Well, when you just look at the local level and have the environment in mind, what we are trying to do, and, you know, Baha'i communities are, for the most part, still small, you know, in most parts of the world. You can find them almost everywhere in the world, but they are usually small, although there are exceptions with larger communities. But what we do is try to get a sense of what are the problems of our community, what are the issues, what are the environmental and social problems that we need to tackle. We try to identify them and consult with the method that I just tried to explain, and then we try to come up with a holistic approach, because you cannot solve climate change, for example, and disregard all other issues. It is so much connected to the problem of extreme poverty and wealth, other social issues, as well as other environmental issues. And the nice thing is that solutions or actions that can help climate change can often also help other issues. And you know that, you know, like you try to reduce carbon emissions from transportation, and you also work for clean air, you know. So, but many other things go together. But it's really important to keep people in mind, and to have people at the table, like indigenous people. They bring so much wisdom, and women around the world, they need to be at the table, and on the local level as well as on all other levels, up to the international level.
That actually reminds me of a little event just last Sunday. We had one of our regular Baha'i gatherings, and then It was a suggestion of a 4-year-old that we should afterwards go around and pick up trash up and down the blocks. So the parents had provided trash bags and gloves, and anybody who could just did a roundabout. But it's interesting that it came from this 4-year-old girl.
Nice.
I think highlighting and remembering the role that youth play. I was recently at COP28 and just really inspired by the way that young people are showing up and using their voices, and like how important it is that those young voices also be part of these big decision making processes, because they really are the ones that are inspired to pick up trash in their neighborhood and are able to make those connections between that local level and what is happening or needs to happen kind of at a global cooperation scale as well. Earlier in the program, Christine, you particularly highlighted this connection between science and religion. So I want to kind of go back to that as we move towards the end of our discussion. Wondering, obviously, for those of us who are gathered here, we all find some kind of value in this intersection, but wondering why, particularly for both you, Christine, and Helga, you think there's a lot of value in what can be gained at the cross section between both the discipline of science and religion from your own perspectives.
Well, science asks the fundamental question of how does the universe work? And in our specific interest, how does the environment work? What are the causes of climate change? What are its impacts, and what can we do about it? These are all domains of science. While religion gives us the values and the ethics, and it gives us, it asks the question, what is the meaning of our lives? What is the meaning of the universe? And it gives us the direction of moral action. So we need both of these disciplines, science and religion, to advance in our individual and community lives, but also as a species, as human beings. We really need to apply both, especially at this critical age when we are really on the verge of destroying the foundation of life. So we do need all the technology and you need to use it wisely according to always with the well-being of all of humankind as well as of future generations in mind. In this way, I think we can overcome and we can assure that future generations can also live on this planet and enjoy a diversity of plants and animals as we have.
Yeah, I was in the lucky position to just get a little bit more insights in a very hands-on way in these reading groups that the Association for Bahá'í Studies has. So we read a book called What Your Food Ate, which is very scientific on, how the connection between soil, plant health, animal health, and human health, how it actually looks from a science perspective, and connected it then with spiritual values from the Baha'i faith and others.
Yeah, I think that, again, for me, like, science can do so much for us. It gives us so much data. It doesn't always answer the question for us of like, well, then what should we do with the data? And so I think that like our different faith traditions and these centuries old practices that we have can help us to navigate some of those. Well, like, okay, well, what do we do? How do we particularly do the work of justice and addressing environmental racism and the inequities that are experienced across climate change for people in the global south, or particularly women and gender minority communities? And so thinking about how those two play together, I think really brings a new perspective that I think is very important in this work. Well, thank you, Christine and Helga, for sharing so generously with us your perspectives and the things that you've learned. I'm going to share just a couple of organizational updates. So if you enjoyed this conversation and you haven't checked out our previous conversations, you can find those on our website. Reinika will go ahead and drop a link into the chat. We will have 2 more of these conversations, at least for this series. Next month, we will be learning from our Unitarian Universalist friends. So I hope that you will join us on February 1st, which is a Thursday. We'll be meeting again at noon. So bring your lunch, your tea, tell a friend. We would be very glad to have you join us. And again, you can find those previous series or conversations available on the website. I'm also just a reminder for folks who are part of our network that our business meeting is coming up at the end of this month. And we just in October of last year, we worked to relaunch our memberships. So if you are hoping to be part of this year's business meeting and vote in our new board members, which is very exciting, I encourage you to check out the link to join us for our business meeting. You don't need to be a member to join us for our business meeting, but if you would like to have a vote, you can learn more about our membership either for your congregation or as an individual, and Reinika will also put those links into the chat. So we would be glad to see you at either upcoming conversations, or if you're interested in getting more involved in the network, to see you at those. Have deep gratitude and thanks to our series partners for this, to Delaware Interfaith Power and Light for their steadfast partnership. And thank you to those of you who are joining from that network today. And then also the Better Path Coalition and also Green Muslims, who have worked with us through this series to share to a wider audience. So thank you to each of those. I am going to turn it over for this final moments of our closing reflection to Helga, who is going to send us out today with a short offering, a meditation or reflection from the Baha'i tradition. So again, thank you, friends, for being here. I look forward to seeing you again sometime.
Blessed is the spot, and the house, and the place, and the city, and the heart, and the mountain, and the refuge, and the cave, and the valley, and the land, and the sea, and the island, and the meadow, where mention of God hath been made, and his praise glorified. It's from the writings of Baha'u'llah.
Thank you, Helga.
Thank you, yes.
Thank you very much, Katie, and thank everyone who participated and attended today. It was great to see you all. Some familiar faces and many new faces.